We thought the vote was going to start at 2:30. I think the vice chairman presumed that, and that he'd have a chance to vote and stuff. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to roll through. There are 2 votes this afternoon, colleagues, and we will roll through these. I'm going to call this hearing to order, and I want to welcome today's witnesses, Mr. Kent Walker, President, Global Affairs and Chief Legal Officer, Alphabet, Mr. Nick Clegg, President, Global Affairs, Meta, and Mr. Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President of Microsoft. Today's hearing builds on this committee's longstanding practice of educating the public about the intentions and practices of foreign adversaries seeking to manipulate our country's electoral process. I do know we've all come a long way since 2017, when, as many folks may remember, there was a lot of skepticism that our adversaries might have utilized America's social media platforms for intelligence activities. It was almost 7 years ago that, in response to inquiries from this committee, that Facebook shared first evidence of what would become an expansive discovery, documenting Russia's use of tens of thousands of inauthentic accounts across Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, LinkedIn, and even smaller platforms like Gab and Tumblr and Medium and Pinterest, all to try to divide Americans and influence their votes. And through this committee's bipartisan investigation into the Russian interference in the 2016 election, we learned that Russia had devoted millions to wide-ranging influence campaigns that literally generated hundreds of millions of online impressions, which sowed political division, racial division, and impersonated social, political, and faith groups of all stripes across all ends of the political spectrum to infiltrate and manipulate our debate. Our committee's bipartisan efforts also resulted in a set of recommendations for government, for the private sector, and for political campaigns. Recommendations for which I hope today's hearing will serve as a status check. These recommendations included greater information sharing between the U.S. government and the private sector about foreign malicious activity, not domestic, foreign malicious activity. Greater transparency measures by platforms to inform users about that malicious activity, as well as more information on the origin and authenticity of information presented to them. And this was something that didn't get a lot of attention, facilitation of open source research by academics and civil society organizations to better assist platforms here and others and the public in identifying malicious use of social media, again, by foreign actors. On the government side, we've also seen some significant progress. And let me state right now that the 2020 election, I think, was the most secure in United States history. And that's verified by election security experts. And I want to commend the Trump administration for helping that come about. Now, it came about because the progress has been made through a combination of both bipartisan appropriation of funding for election upgrades, things that folks on both sides of the aisle have been calling for a long time, paper records, risk-limiting audits to verify results, a better postured, frankly, national security community that we have oversight on to track and expose and disrupt foreign adversarial election threats, and I think a pretty successful effort to share threat information about foreign influence activity with the private sector. U.S. tech companies have made progress, although, as I warned all of our witnesses, albeit uneven, since 2016. These include, and I want to cite because many of you were present when the 3 companies in front of us, and literally 24 other companies, including companies where unfortunately, a lot of this is taking place now, X, formerly known as Twitter, which wouldn't even send a representative today, where 27 companies signed in Munich what was called the Tech Accord to Combat Deceptive Use of AI in 2024 election, not just in America, but around the world. And while I appreciate the voluntary commitments that were made there, I think it has been uneven about where's the beef, how much has actually been done. Recently, I sent letters to all 27 of those companies. Some came back with specificity, some of you. Unfortunately, others simply ignored even responding. And why we are doing this, and again, on a bipartisan basis, is there's 4 new factors that I think has raised my concerns dramatically. First is our adversaries realize this is effective and cheap. Putin clearly understands if he wants to try to undermine American support for Ukraine, weighing in and frankly putting up fake information can help him in that matter. Similarly, we've seen since the conflict between Israel and Hamas after post-October 7th, this has also been a ripe area for foreign misinformation and disinformation. And again, we've seen Iran dramatically increase their efforts to stoke social discord in the U.S.
I think misinformation is information they don't like.
We've seen lesser from China, but there have been some efforts by China on, not at the national level, but on down ballot races where candidates may not be taking a pro-CCP position. Recently, and literally in the last 8 weeks, we've seen a covert influence project led by RT to bankroll unwitting U.S. political influencers on YouTube. We've seen a wide-ranging Russian campaign that frankly has not gotten much media attention because I think they focused on the guys in Tennessee and not some of the slides that we're going to put up later in our questioning, where major institutions like the Washington Post and Fox News, the bad guys have basically put out false information under those banners with the goal of spreading what sounds like credible sounding narratives to really shape American voters' perceptions of candidates and campaigns. And we've seen, and this committee has called this out, efforts to infiltrate American protests over the conflict in Gaza by Iranian influence operatives who, again, seek to stoke division, and in many cases, in terms of these efforts, denigrate former President Trump. I do want to acknowledge that in these recent efforts, you all have played a positive role. I want to thank Meta, and I hope our committee's interest in this subject helped move you yesterday when you guys decided to take down RT and related Russian influence operations. I want to thank Microsoft for being forward-leaning and publicly sharing information on, again, some of the Russian activities. And I want to thank Alphabet, and I'm going to call you guys more by Facebook and Google for the lesson form, when you were one of the first to come forward on the sources on the Iranian hacks. So compliments to all of you on that. On an overall basis, though, we've also seen the scale and sophistication of the kind of attacks be escalated. When we think about AI tools, we all know about that. I think we originally thought this would be in the form of deep fakes, video and audio alteration. You're going to see AI type tools being used to create what appears and virtually any American voter would think is a real Fox News or Washington Post site, when in reality it isn't. And unfortunately, Congress has not been able
That's
to take on
from
this
the
issue.
American
But I would point out, and it's a
Psychology
pretty broad
Association.
swath of individual states, and they range across the political spectrum, that have really put some pretty significant guardrails in place, and at least in terms of deep fake manipulation in their state elections. And that's Alabama, Texas, Michigan, Florida, and California. I wish we could take some of the best ideas from those states and bring them at the national level. Most of you have indicated that you have not seen, and I think the good news is so far we've not seen the kind of massive AI interference that we might have expected, particularly in the British or French elections. But as we know from past times, the real time that this will gear up will be closer to the election. And third, the truth is, way back in 2016, Russia had to create fake personas to spin wild stories. Unfortunately, we now have a case where...
Oh, you mean like President Trump went in a hotel in Moscow and hired prostitutes to pee on a bed? You mean like that?
Traditional media. There was increased reliance on the internet. I think most of us would try to tell our kids, just because you saw it on the internet doesn't mean it's true. But the job of the adversaries to amplify things that are stated by Americans goes up dramatically. And finally, we've seen a concerted litigation campaign that has sought to undermine the federal government's ability to share this vital threat information between you guys and the government and vice versa. And frankly, a lot of those independent academic third-party checkers have really been bullied in some case or litigated into silence. For instance, we've seen the shuttering of the election disinformation work at Stanford's Internet Observatory, as well as the termination of a key research project
Yeah,
at Harvard Shorenstein
good,
Center.
because it's really
We
called
need those academic
censorship.
researchers in the game as that independent source. And again, this is a question that really bothers me, and I know we may litigate this a bit in back.
This dude
Too
likes
many of the
censorship.
companies have dramatically cut back on their own efforts to prohibit false information. And again, we're talking about foreign sources. And we've seen the rise, and Senator Rubio and I have been on the lead on this, of a foreign-owned platform that has a huge reach in the case of TikTok, that has huge national security concerns, and very, very glad that over 80% of both the House and the Senate voted to say creative platform shouldn't be ultimately controlled by the CCP. Now, in the last open hearing we had on this topic, we heard about what the federal government's doing to disrupt. We're going to continue to get with law enforcement and the IC before Election Day. But this is really our effort to try to urge you guys to do more, to kind of alert the public that this problem has not gone away. We have, Lord knows, we have enough differences between Americans that those differences don't need to be exacerbated by our foreign adversaries. Because, and again, we are not cherry picking these adversaries. These are nation states that are in the law of our country. China, Russia, Iran have been, North Korea, others have been designated as foreign adversaries. The truth is, we're 48 days away from an election. We do the open hearings, and I appreciate Senator Cornyn's, Cotton, and a lot of my colleagues getting here early. We are going to do by seniority rather than at the gavel. With that, Senator Rubio.
Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you all for agreeing to be here. It's important. It's actually a tricky and difficult topic because I think there are two kinds of things we're trying to address. The first is generated disinformation, and that's, I think you're going to describe some of those efforts today, but that is some foreign adversary, Iran, China, Russia. They create or make something up, and then they amplify it. They basically make it up, they push it out there, and they hope people believe it. It's actually something, I remember giving a speech back in 2018 or 2019 warning about AI-generated videos that were going to be the wave of the future, and in terms of trying to influence what people think and see, and we've seen some of that already play out. That's pretty straightforward. Let me tell you where it gets complicated. Where it gets complicated is there is a pre-existing view that people have in American politics. I use this as an example, not because I generally agree with it, but because I think it's an important example. There are people in the United States who believe that perhaps we shouldn't have gotten involved with Ukraine or shouldn't have gotten involved in the conflict in Europe. Vladimir Putin also happens to believe and hope that that's what we will conclude. And so now there's someone out there saying something that, whether you agree with them or not, is a legitimate political view that's pre-existing. And now some Russian bot decides to amplify the views of an American citizen who happens to hold that. All
right, I'll go back and come back in.
The question becomes, is that disinformation, or is that misinformation? Is that an influence operation because an existing view is being amplified? Now, it's easy to say, well, just